Welcome to Intermediate JavaScript Lesson 3. So some quick review. How do we return a value from a function? So in order to do this, we just type return and then the value we want and then a semicolon. And then what is the difference between local and global variables? Local variables are declared inside a certain piece of code, inside like a function, and they are created and destroyed inside that function. So you cannot access them outside of that function. However, globals can be accessed anywhere in your piece of code. So now we're going to go over keys. And how do we check if a certain key, like a keyboard key, is pressed down? We have to say if key is pressed and key code equals down. So this first piece right here is a Boolean that is going to be true if any key is pressed on your keyboard. And this second is checking whether the key code, so the actual key that's being pressed down, this is a piece of data that stores what key is being pressed down, is equal to down, up, left, right, etc. So how do we use this in our code? What kind of statement would we put in it? And we would put an if statement, right? So it's like if key is pressed and key code is up, then do something. So quick quiz. How should we make sure the code always is ready to do something when the key is pressed down? So how do we make sure we're always checking if the key is pressed down? And the answer is we make sure that we put these if statements inside loops or draw loops to make sure that the code is running those pieces of code constantly. So it'll always be running it when something is pressed down. It is like always listening and waiting until something is being pressed down. So a quick project is going to be color circle. So we want to just make a circle that changes color based on the key pressed. If we press the arrow key up, it should be red. If we press down, it should be purple. If we should press right, it should be blue. And if we press left, it should be green. So we want to make sure we use this key is pressed and key code is equal to something in our code. So yeah, pause the video right here. Well, first of all, what will we change in each if statement? So a hint is if we're checking for up, left, down, and right, we would change this from up to left to down and right. So yeah, pause the video here and click play when you're done with this project. Okay, so here's the answer. When I hit my arrow keys, it changes color. So inside our draw function, so first of all, we put all our code inside a draw function because we need to make sure that the computer is constantly checking, not just once, but always checking if a key is pressed. And then all we have is just a whole bunch of if else's, right? So like if key is pressed and key code equals up, make it this color. Else, if it's down, make it this color. If it's right, make it this color. Else, if it's left, make it this color. And then finally draw the actual ellipse with the color that was specified. So yeah, quite simple. So yeah, there was the option to just draw a more complicated shape, but it's all the same idea, where we just have those if-else statements that set the color. So now we're going to look at controlling our drawings and like making them move around. So let's say we had a circle, triangle, person, or whatever you want to move based on your arrow keys. How can we change the position of the circle based on the arrow keys, based on what arrow key is pressed, right? So let's say we have this function being called for our circle, right? So circle x, y, width, and height. We would, in order to like change where the circle is drawn, we would just make the x and y variables change based on arrow key statements. So like inside our arrow key statement, right? So like if this arrow key is pressed, we could like change our x by 1. So our next project is drawing Danny. We're going to draw a face and move it using the arrow keys. Here is a demo. So right here, I'm pressing the arrow keys and the face is moving. So in order to do this, we're going to make these global variables, x and y. and we're going to set them to a value, preferably like the middle of the screen. And then inside our draw function, we're going to put in all our if statements, right? The arrow key if statements that we learned about. And we're going to draw Danny using ellipses. The 4 ellipses are for the mouth, face, and the 2 eyes. But the main logic here is inside our draw loop, we have these if statements in our drawing. And inside the if statements for the arrow keys, we want to modify X and Y. So like when we're hitting the up arrow, we want to modify Y. And when we're hitting the left and right arrow, we want to modify X. So pause the video here and try to make a face that you can move up, down, left, and right with arrow keys. And click play when you are done. Okay, so here is the answer. So basically all we have is we have inside our draw function, we basically set a background, and then our draw Danny is all of these ellipses. We could have made this a function, but just for now, since we're only kind of calling it once, we didn't really make a function and we just had a big chunk of code. And then we're still inside the draw function. We basically check if the up arrow is down, or the down arrow, the right arrow, or left arrow, and modify these global variables depending on what arrow key is down. And since these global variables will change, then when the draw loop goes back up to the top and redraws Danny, this X and Y is going to be a new value. So it's actually going to move where the circle is being drawn based on these if statements that modified the X and Y. And that's what kind of gives the animation and it allows us to actually move the face. So some extensions here, if we wanted him to move faster or slower, and if we wanted him to change color along with the position. And then finally, if we want to make Danny accelerate. So the longer we hold down an arrow key, the faster it'll go. So here we have challenges 1 and 2, where he changes color and moves at different speeds. So all this is, first of all, the moving at different speeds, it's just we modify our X and Y variables by different amounts. So if we modify it by a bigger amount, it's going to move faster. But if we modify it by a smaller amount, it'll move slower. So if I set this to really high, it's going to move faster. But then if I set it to really low, so like 0.05, like what it was at, 0.5, then it'll move pretty slow. But then our Y is set to 3, so it's going to move a lot faster. The modification of the variable is set to positive or negative 3. So that's a lot faster than changing it by 0.5 each time. And then to change color, all we do is in our draw function, we have a fill statement that basically takes in our X and Y. And we basically, the math is a bit complicated, but we basically take in X and Y and scale it to certain ranges so the color doesn't get too dark or light and it stays within the valid color ranges. And then finally, the third challenge is make Danny accelerate. So you see here, the longer I hold it down, the faster he goes. And the way to do that is you just create two other global variables called X acceleration and Y acceleration that will just basically increase when it's being pressed down and then be set back to 0 when we let go. And then every second we hold it down longer, this acceleration will get bigger and bigger. So then every single time we're modifying this variable, it's not only being modified by 1, which is linear speed, but then also by this acceleration, which will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger the longer we hold it down. So the faster it'll go over time. So a quick recap. What are the 2 conditions for if statements to sense if a certain key is pressed? The answer to this is if key is pressed, and then the second condition is key code is equal to whatever key you want it to be. And then finally is how do we make objects change speed? We would make kind of this acceleration variable that will increment the longer something is held down. And then when we're actually modifying our X or Y variable, we're going to also incorporate that acceleration that is incrementing the longer we hold it down, which will change our x or y variable by more and more and more the longer we hold the arrow key down. So yeah, nice job, everyone. That is the end of JavaScript Lesson 3 Intermediate.